Okay, guys, I've kind of switched to the YouTube format basically because I had a friend mention it to me. That's what I needed to do, or should look into doing. And I was like, yeah, okay. I kind of blew it off. I didn't blow him off. It was just a suggestion. I really like Facebook Live. And then my friend made a couple YouTube posts. I'm like, Lord, what's the deal? Kind of pinged in my spirit. Once again, he said, you need to utilize YouTube. You need to start doing it this way. I'm like, okay, whatever. So she showed me how, walked me through a few things. And when the episode happened with the Facebook app the other night, it just reiterated, you need to do some YouTube. So we're going to try this for a while. And if we don't like it, we'll go back to Facebook Live. I don't know. We're just going to try to be obedient. But tonight, we're going to finish our teaching, probably finish it up tonight on Esther. I know you're getting tired of hearing about her, but she's my hero, or my shero. I've learned so much from her and her story. Sorry, my allergies are a mess. We may start on Ruth after this. A couple of things about Ruth that I've gleaned over the past year. I've spent about a year in her. Esther is one of those stories that you can read and read and reread and read it over again and get something different every time out of it. I suggest you dig into her story. It's amazing. So we know that she was taken to the harem, done the beauty treatments, was taken to the king. He was pleased with her. She takes Vashti's position. So there was a turning point in Esther, though, because up until then she was the beautiful, docile, demure beauty queen. I mean, she was just sweet, and I don't know. There's just something about Esther that was just charming. But the turning point in her development comes at the end of the scene in chapter 4, verses 15 and 16. She resolves to do her duty, and this immediate change comes upon her. She abruptly and surprisingly commands Mordecai. She doesn't ask him, she commands him to assemble the Jews for a public fast. Now, in doing this, in bringing together the community in such a way, she's assuming the role of religious and national leader. She's taking control. She's giving Mordecai instructions, bringing the Jews together on how to fast. She takes her fate in her hands with this courageous declaration. And this is the way I will go to the king. Contrary to law, if I perish, I perish. Now, this is the courage of one who realizes she must do her duty without any certainty of its success, or without any faith that a higher being will protect her. Her resolute behavior shows her to be a woman determined to work her way through a crisis and to take charge when necessary. Ladies, are we willing to take charge when necessary and work our way through a crisis? She begins thinking for herself during this process. We got 2 banquet scenes here. She unwinds her strategy patiently and deftly. I'm sorry. Our first request to the king is simply to have him and Haman come to dinner. Well, the plan that she executes is of her own devising. Mordecai had merely told her to go to the king and entreat him on behalf of her people. With no further consultation, she's decided to approach the task in a way quite different from what Mordecai and what even I would expect. Esther does not simply exploit her beauty and erotic charms, even though it's in doing so such a fateful cause would be justified and wouldn't detract from her dignity. But it's unclear that a move like that would even help. Esther's husband and king has free access to her sexuality as it is. So she's got to draw upon other untested and unexpected intellectual powers. And she chooses a more circlish approach, one that involves near disobedience to the king. Can you imagine? Even though he virtually orders her in 5:3 to declare her wish, she does not comply until the next day. Strict compliance is no longer her prime virtue. That's gone out the window. So at this dinner in chapter 5, Esther merely invites the king and Haman to another dinner. Okay? Now, is this just for dinners that she's risked her life? A cleverer man than the king might realize that this is really a strange request. She could have sent a message to this effect, but the king isn't really wise and clever. Okay. Esther has a plan, and no one, not Mordecai, not the king, not Haman, nobody is let in on it. She is her own woman. And if you're in suspense, so's the king. So the explanation for Esther of delaying this request, her real request, until the second banquet, is that she's kind of unfolding a premeditated strategy. And she's doing it with kind of careful thought and deftness. And in this second banquet in chapter 7, she builds up to the accusation with great care. Oh, she was smart and astute. She's softening her speech with deferential courtesies and demurrals that play into the king's ego and piquing his suspense and eliciting a promise to fulfill her wish, whatever it may be, withholding information that could put the king on the defensive by making him face his own culpability. She's delaying other information, the identity of the offender, until she is given full momentum to the king's anger. Who has done this thing to my wife? My wife, he must be thinking, for his own honor's at stake now. And then Esther suddenly cracks out her accusation like a whip. Whip! A man hateful and hostile. This evil Haman right here. Then having set Haman careening toward destruction, she lets things take their own course. When Haman falls before Esther's couch and begs for his life, oh my goodness, the king can condemn him for something other than the murderous scheme which the king himself had endorsed. But at the conclusion of Esther's plea, Haman is exposed and is struck with terror, not only before the king, but before the queen. She's now a force to be reckoned with, you hear me? The arrogant Agagite who demanded that Mordecai the Jew bow before him now lies fallen before Esther the Jew, begging for mercy. And Esther's silence gives her a stony, imperious air. Haman has no claim on pity. Sparing him would only leave him around to try new schemes. So, in the scenes where Esther traps Haman, she's indirect and self-effacing and manipulative. And some of the commentators you read find these qualities morally unappealing or unacceptable as an image of the feminine. But how else would one behave in the Persian court? Or any court for that matter. The Vashti episode kind of demonstrated that the king might react badly to a strong-willed woman. Okay? Now, this might have been fine for Vashti, but it would have rendered Esther ineffective. So, the king might realize that he could protect his wife from a mob without sacrificing his vizier or butting up against the earlier decree. The slow-witted monarch has to be brought to the brink of action by suspense and anger, then pushed into action before he could think it through. Now, in all this, Esther gains authority. Pardon my runny nose. That very day, the king, apparently assuming all of this ruckus was about a wrong done to his wife, gives her Haman's property and immediately transfers control of it to Mordecai. Now, this episode kind of restructures relationship and raises Esther's status. Now, she is a source of great agent and wealth and empowerment for Mordecai. Think about that. So, thereafter, Esther falls weeping at the king's feet, imploring him to annul Haman's decree. Now, that was the approach that Mordecai expected her to take at the start. But this request is problematic because if you look, Daniel 6:8, 12, and 15, a royal decree cannot be rescinded. Okay? So the baffled king simply turns the matter over to the two Jews to deal with, telling them, plural, two of them, to write a decree as they see fit, giving Mordecai the signet, the royal signet, just as he once did to Haman, and they had to figure it all out for themselves. Well, the result is an increase in power for the two. Mordecai is wearing the royal signet, issues a counter decree in the king's name. He can't rescind the permission to attack the Jews, but he can allow them to fight back. Now, all the Jews must join in the effort. So they gather to stand up for their lives against enemies who have chosen to attack them. Then Esther receives permission to continue, and a mopping up action ensues the next day. Now, in the aftermath, the Jews celebrate not their victory, but the respite from battle. Okay? Mordecai takes note of all this initiative and proposes to make it a big celebration, and the people accept. And Esther issues an epistle that validates it all. And her pronouncement is called Me'amar, the term used of Ahasuerus' command to Vashti in 1:15, and Mordecai's command to Esther in 2:20, and the people in 9:9. She can issue commands because she's queen of Persia, as well as proven leader of the Jews. So this once docile, subtle beauty rose to royal stature, standing with her cousin as a leader. So we're going to look at, I tell you, I've got so much to go through here. One more thing. Esther has often been condemned for being indirect and manipulative. Well, she is, and thank goodness for that. She had to be like everybody else in the place, don't you think? But she's never actively deceptive. Unless honesty demands that she come to Haman's defense when the king accuses him of trying to rape her. So, Esther behaves with dignity and courage and good sense as far as I'm concerned. There's nothing demeaning in the approaching the king as a supplicant or with personal influence to achieve a valid goal. Imagine the counter story. Say Esther stomps into the inner court and issues a series of bold, non-negotiable demands and calling for the restoration of Vashti and the equality of all women in the realm, and she'd have been promptly killed, or at least disposed of and rendered useless. The story would have been just a bitter satire on the female ego. And more precisely, there would have been no book. Think about that. The author of Esther is aware of the female subservience and is cynical about the masculine qualities that require it. We see it in Vashti's incident, when the king's reaction and his noblemen to Vashti's refusal is self-defeating, and their concern for female obedience is ludicrous. Absolutely ludicrous. Sometimes I think of this book that I've just come to loving so much, sometimes as a satire on the male ego. The author of Esther, very much aware that males, at least in the quirky Gentile world, must use political power to enforce their position. And even so, they don't really succeed. That harem is the most successful locus of male dominance. And its order is enforced by a neutered man. Think about that. So, the author of Esther more or less depicts a successful relationship of cooperation between male and female, in which both attain prestige and influence in the Jewish community and beyond. And what's more, the book takes its hero, a woman, whose importance to the Jewish people does not lie in the childbearing, lied in the deliverance. There's only been a handful of such cases in the Bible. So where does your importance to your people come in? You know you've been called into the kingdom for such a time as this, and you know what your job is. You know what you're supposed to be doing. Yet you're waiting for someone to give you permission while a nation perishes. I hate to tell you this, but revival's in the land. I can smell it coming. Esther's, it's time you rise up.